Hi. Welcome to my channel, World History Official.
The Earth is flat.
And that's beyond the pole on the other side of the South Pole, from Little America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
In 1961, William Branham said, "I tell you now, it's a program that will take you 100 billion million light years beyond the moon." That's right. And there, if you go to the moon, you could not set down because, see, you did jump right back up, unless you had some magnet to hold you there. You could not stay overnight. You did freeze to death. In the daytime you did burn up. What you going to do when you get there? The following words is an excerpt from W.M. Cooper's site. NASA was created to make interstellar travel believable. The Apollo space program foisted the idea that man could travel to, and walk upon, the moon. Every Apollo mission was carefully rehearsed, and then filmed, in large sound stages, at the Atomic Energy Commission's top-secret test site, in the Nevada desert, and in a secured and guarded sound stage at the Walt Disney Studios, within which was a huge-scale mock-up of the moon. All of the names, missions, landing sites, and events in the Apollo space program echoed the occult metaphors, rituals, and symbology of the Illuminati's secret religion. The most transparent was the faked explosion on the spacecraft Apollo 13, named Aquarius, New Age, at 13:13 military time, on April 13, 1970, which was the metaphor for the initiation ceremony, involving the death or explosion, placement in the coffin, period of uncertainty of their survival, communion with the spiritual world, and the imparting of esoteric knowledge to the candidate, orbit and observation of the moon without physical contact. Rebirth of the initiate, solution of problem and repairs, and the raising up of the phoenix, the new age of Aquarius, by the grip of the lion's paw, re-entry and recovery of Apollo 13. 13 is the number of death and rebirth, death and reincarnation, sacrifice, the phoenix, the Christ, perfected soul imprisoned in matter, and the transition from the old to the new. Another revelation, to those who understand the symbolic language of the Illuminati, is the hidden meaning of the names of the space shuttles, a Columbian enterprise to endeavor for the discovery of Atlantis, and all challengers shall be destroyed. Exploration of the moon stopped, because it was impossible to continue the hoax without being ultimately discovered, and of course, they ran out of pre-filmed episodes. No man has ever ascended higher than 300 miles, if that high, above the Earth's surface. No man has ever orbited, landed on, or walked upon the moon in any publicly known space program. If man has ever truly been to the moon, it has been done in secret and with a far different technology. The tremendous radiation encountered in the Van Allen belt, solar radiation, cosmic radiation, temperature control, and many other problems connected with space travel, prevent living organisms leaving our atmosphere with our known level of technology. Any intelligent high school student with a basic physics book can prove NASA faked the Apollo moon landings. If you doubt this, please explain how the astronauts walked upon the moon's surface, enclosed in a space suit, in full sunlight, absorbing a minimum of 265 degrees of heat surrounded by a vacuum. NASA tells us the moon has no atmosphere, and that the astronauts were surrounded by the vacuum of space. Heat is defined as the vibration or movement of molecules within matter. The faster the molecular motion, the higher the temperature. The slower the molecular motion, the colder the temperature. Absolute zero is that point where all molecular motion ceases. In order to have hot or cold, molecules must be present. A vacuum is a condition of nothingness, where there are no molecules. Vacuums exist in degrees. Some scientists tell us that there is no such thing as an absolute vacuum. Space is the closest thing to an absolute vacuum that is known to us. There are so few molecules present in most areas of what we know as space, that any concept of hot or cold is impossible to measure. A vacuum is a perfect insulator. That is why a thermos, or vacuum bottle, is used to store hot or cold liquids, in order to maintain the temperature for the longest time possible, without reheating or recooling. Radiation of all types will travel through a vacuum, but will not affect the vacuum. Radiant heat from the sun travels through the vacuum of space, but does not warm space. In fact, the radiant heat of the sun has no effect whatsoever until it strikes matter. Molecular movement will increase in direct proportion to the radiant energy, which is absorbed by matter. The time it takes to heat matter, exposed to direct sunlight in space, is determined by its color, its elemental properties, its distance from the sun, and its rate of absorption of radiant heat energy. Space is not hot. Space is not cold. Objects which are heated cannot be cooled by space. In order for an object to cool, it must first be removed from direct sunlight. Objects which are in the shadow of another object will eventually cool, but not because space is cold. Space is not cold. Hot and cold do not exist in the vacuum of space. Objects cool because the laws of motion dictate that the molecules of the object will slow down, due to the resistance resulting from striking other molecules, until eventually all motion will stop, provided the object is sheltered from the direct and/or indirect radiation of the sun, and that there is no other source of heat. Since the vacuum of space is the perfect insulator, objects take a very long time to cool, even when removed from all sources of heat, radiated or otherwise. NASA insists the space suits the astronauts supposedly wore on the lunar surface were air-conditioned. An air conditioner cannot, and will not work without a heat exchanger. A heat exchanger simply takes heat gathered in a medium, such as Freon, from one place and transfers it to another place. This requires a medium of molecules, which can absorb and transfer the heat, such as an atmosphere or water. An air conditioner will not and cannot work in a vacuum. A spacesuit surrounded by a vacuum cannot transfer heat from the inside of the suit to any other place. The vacuum, remember, is a perfect insulator. A man would roast in a suit in such a circumstance. NASA claims the spacesuits were cooled by a water system, which was piped around the body, then through a system of coils, sheltered from the sun in the backpack. NASA claims that water was sprayed on the coils, causing a coating of ice to form. The ice then supposedly absorbed the tremendous heat, collected in the water, and evaporated into space. There are two problems with this that cannot be explained away. 1. The amount of water needed to be carried by the astronauts in order to make this work, for even a very small length of time, in the direct 55 degrees over the boiling point of water, or 210 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level on Earth, heat of the sun could not have possibly been carried by the astronauts. 2. NASA has since claimed that they found ice in moon craters. NASA claims that ice sheltered from the direct rays of the sun will not evaporate, destroying their own bogus air conditioning explanation. Remember this. Think about it, the next time you go off in the morning, with a vacuum bottle, filled with hot coffee. Think about it long and hard, when you sit down and pour a piping hot cup from your thermos, to drink with your lunch 4 hours later, and then think about it again, when you pour the last still very warm cup of coffee at the end of the day. The same laws of physics apply to any vehicle traveling through space, including the Tesla car and SpaceX mission. NASA claims that the spacecraft was slowly rotated, causing the shadowed side to be cooled by the intense cold of space, an intense cold that does not exist. In fact, the only thing that could have been accomplished by a rotation of the spacecraft is a more even and constant heating, such as that obtained by rotating a hot dog on a spit. In reality, a dish called Astronaut a la Apollo would have been served. At the very least, you would not want to open the hatch upon the craft's return. NASA knows better than to claim, in addition, that a water cooling apparatus, such as that which they claim cooled the astronaut suits, cooled the spacecraft. No rocket could ever have been launched with the amount of water needed to work such a system for even a very short period of time. Fresh water weighs a little over 62 pounds per cubic foot. Space and weight capacity were critical given the lift capability of the rockets used in the Apollo space program. No such extra water was carried by any mission whatsoever, for suits or for cooling the spacecraft. On the tapes, the astronauts complained bitterly of the cold during their journey and while on the surface of the moon. They spoke of using heaters that did not give off enough heat to overcome the intense cold of space. It was imperative that NASA use this ruse, because to tell the truth would tell the truth. It is also proof of the arrogance and contempt in which the Illuminati holds the common man. What we heard is in reality indicative of an overzealous cooling system in the props used during the filming of the missions at the Atomic Energy Commission's Nevada desert test site, where it is common to see temperatures well over 100 degrees. In the glaring unfiltered direct heat of the sun, the astronauts could never have been cold at any time whatsoever in the perfect insulating vacuum of space. NASA claims that the space suits worn by the astronauts were pressurized at 5 pounds per square inch over the ambient pressure, 0 pound per square inch vacuum on the moon's surface. We have examined the gloves NASA claims the astronauts wore and find they are made of pliable material containing no mechanical, hydraulic, or electrical devices which would aid the astronauts in the dexterous use of their fingers and hands while wearing the gloves. Experiments prove absolutely that such gloves are impossible to use, and that the wearer cannot bend the wrist or fingers to do any dexterous work whatsoever, when filled with 5 pounds per square inch over ambient pressure either in a vacuum or in the Earth's atmosphere. NASA actually showed film and television footage of astronauts using their hands and fingers normally during their EVAs on the so-called lunar surface. The films show clearly that there is no pressure whatsoever within the gloves, a condition that would have caused explosive decompression of the astronauts, resulting in almost immediate death if they had really been surrounded by the vacuum of space. If you do not believe it, try it yourself. It is a very simple experiment, and does not require a rocket scientist to perform. These are just two of over 100 very simple and very easy to prove valid scientific reasons why NASA and the Apollo space program are two of the biggest lies ever foisted upon the unsuspecting and trusting people of the world. Most, if not all, of the photos, films, and videotape of the Apollo moon missions are easily proven to be fake. Anyone with the slightest knowledge of photography, lighting, and physics can easily prove that NASA faked the visual records of the Apollo space program. Some are so obviously fake that when the discrepancies are pointed out to unsuspecting viewers an audible gasp has been heard. Some have actually gone into a mild state of shock. Some people break down and cry. I have seen others become so angry that they have ripped the offending photos to shreds, while screaming incoherently. See Fred Kleinknecht, head of NASA at the time of the Apollo space program, is now the Sovereign Grand Commander of the Council of the 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry of the Southern Jurisdiction. It was his reward for pulling it off. All of the first astronauts were Freemasons. There is a photograph in the House of the Temple in Washington, D.C. of Neil Armstrong on the moon's surface, supposedly in a spacesuit, holding his Masonic apron in front of his groin. The effect upon the people of the world was that if we could go to the moon, other creatures from other worlds could travel to our Earth. The escalation of the artificial alien threat scenario since that time is obvious. The recent revelations of the fraudulent nature of NASA and the Apollo space program, by the intelligence service and others, has resulted in a flood of propaganda, television programs, and films, designed to keep the sheeple trapped in a deep ignorant sleep. The most ambitious are Apollo 13 and From the Earth to the Moon, both involving the actor and producer, Tom Hanks. The latter opens with a monologue by Mr. Hanks, who walks forward revealing a huge representation of the god, Apollo, or sun, Osiris, lost word, etc., guiding his chariot, pulled by 4 horses through the heavens. End of excerpt from William Cooper's recent conspiracy overview. Apollo is Lucifer. And remember that the international flag of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry is the United Nations flag, according to their own site. As Bill Cooper points out, the United Nations flag depicts the nations of the world, encircled by the laurel of Apollo.
And that's beyond the pole on the other side of the slope from Little Mark. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.